תודה רבה. אנחנו ניגשים הישר אל ההרצאה הראשונה, דוקטור ראיף זריק, שהוא מרצה לפילוסופיה של המשפט במרכז האקדמי כרמל, וכן מנהל אקדמי שותף במרכז מינרבה למדעי הרוח, שמתקיים כאן בפקולטה למדעי הרוח באוניברסיטת. נושא ההרצאה שלו על האפשרות לאוריינטציה מוסרית, הרהורים פילוסופיים ופוליטיים. בבקשה.
ערב טוב לכולם, זה בסדר אם נדבר מכאן?
זה רחוק מהפה.
ככה נשמע בסדר. כן, אז תודה רבה על ההזמנה. אני שמח להיות כאן היום. אני חייב כמה התנצלויות. אחד, שאני אדבר באנגלית כי חלק גדול מהציטוטים מהטקסטים הוא באנגלית, ולכן היה פשוט כעניין לחסוך זמן במקום לתרגם, אז החלטתי לכתוב באנגלית ולהשחיל ציטוטים מהספר עצמו בתוך הטקסט, שכן גם לכתוב הרצאה וגם לדבר על הטקסט זה משימה שמושכת בשני כיוונים הפוכים לפעמים, ולכן חשבתי שהדרך הכי מועילה היא לכתוב טקסט ולהשתמש בספר כמקור בלתי נלאה להערות שוליים ולציטטות מתוך הטקסט. אין סוף אינסייטס יצאו מהטקסט. אני בקושי נגעתי בחלק ממש קטן שביניהם. אין לי תזה במה שאני הולך לומר. אני גם, המחויבות שלי לכותרת היא בערבון מוגבל, ותתייחסו לזה כטקסט אסוציאטיבי ויומרני, אבל הוא הזמנה לחשוב. ולכן אני ברשותכם אקרא את הטקסט שלי. It is difficult to discuss the question of evil without reference to Auschwitz. Bringing Auschwitz and evil together invites, in turn, the canonical text by Hannah Arendt on the banality of evil. This text was controversial enough for Gershon Scholem to accuse Arendt of the lack of love to her people. 50 years on, the claim that evil could be banal can still bring people out of their mind, for there must be evil people behind evil actions, and to uphold the thesis of the banality of evil might sound like offering excuses for the perpetrator, or at least diminishing their responsibility. One of the retorts to Arendt's thesis came a decade or so after the publication of her book. Jenna Marie, a Holocaust survivor who was subject to torture in Auschwitz, offers his response in a book titled At the Mind's Limit that I think most of you know. Amory wrote that, I quote, "Evil overlays and exceeds banality, for there is no banality of evil, and Hannah Arendt, who wrote about it in her Eichmann book, knew the enemy of mankind only from hearsay, saw him only through the class gauge." Amory is accusing, end of quote. Amory is accusing Arendt that she doesn't, in fact, know what she's talking about. Had she gone through the experience of the Holocaust herself, she wouldn't find the banality of evil in torture. How and why? Because according to Amory, torture was much more than a mere instrument in the hands of the Nazi police to get information from their victims. As he put it, torture was the essence of National Socialism. More accurately stated, why it was precisely in torture that the Third Reich materialized in all the density of its being, end of quote. And in this sense, although, quote, torture was no invention of National Socialism, but it was its apotheosis, end of quote. For Amory, there must be a distinction between torture to obtain information and torture that was practiced by the Nazis who, in addition to the instrumental nature of torture, quote, tortured with conscience of depravity, end of quote. They had specific processes for torture, but, quote, above all, however, they tortured because they were torturers. They placed torture in their service, but even more, they were its servants of torture. It's very telling to notice already at this point the paradox in our talk about evil. as Michal bin Naftali writes, echoing Amiri, quote, he who is subject to such evil becomes what we call poisoned, namely absorbed by a malignant element without being able to resist, end of quote. The paradox in our talk about evil is that the evildoer here appear to be the servant of torture. In Michal words, quote, poisoned without ability to resist, end quote. Both signal certain lack of freedom or choice and portray an image of being possessed, which is actually a reason to absolve from responsibility, though we think usually for those descriptions to assign a higher responsibility, it seems that it diminishes responsibility. But I will leave this paradox aside. At any case, this differentiation allows Amiri to draw a distinction between the torture practiced by Stalinism and to that practiced by the Nazis. He writes, communism could be de-Stalinized. But who is really able to imagine de-Hitlerized National Socialism? Amiri then goes to juxtapose torture practiced by the Inquisition to that of the Nazis. In the Inquisition, he writes, the torturer believed he was exercising God's justice, since he was, after all, purifying the offender's soul, the tortured heretic or witch, did not at all deny this right. There was a horrible and perverted togetherness. In present day, on the other hand, torture, not a bit of this remains. For the tortured, the torturer is solely the other, and he will be regarded as such. End of quote. Let's pause a minute and think together with Amiri. For Amiri, both Stalinist torture and those of the Inquisition were using torture for some exterior motive. But the Nazis did it because it expressed their essence, the apotheosis of Nazi regime. As Amiri put it clearly, the torture became, they tortured because they were torturers. In many ways, we take this to be as the main feature of evil. Evil is not just doing bad things, but doing bad things for no clear reason, just for the sake of doing bad things, for the hell of it or for the fun of it. In this manner, the idea of evil acts to signal the end of a conversation or a chain of causality and suggests that there is no point in searching beyond that point. When we reach the evil mind or soul, we have reached the end of a chain, the limit of our human capacity and human reason, and we either do not get it, or even better, we don't want to get it, for clear moral reason. As Rína Lazar put in this volume in the introduction, when we name an action evil as opposed to just criminal action, we actually mean that we do not know how to maintain it within the existing order. End quote. And as Yolanda Gampel, following Green, had put it, evil is without why. It has no reason or rationale, and its resoundation depends only on its power. Evil obeys no orders or pressures. It has no goal to pursue. End of quote. In fact, this is the point that Amiri himself gets at. He asks himself a rhetorical question. Were they sadist then? For him, they were, of course, sadist. Quote, the National Socialist in its totality was stamped less with the seal of hardly definable totalitarianism than with that of sadism. And following Bataille, sadism is defined as the radical negation of the other. He wants to nullify the world, and by negating his fellow man, who also is an entirely specific sense is hell for him, he wants to realize his own total sovereignty. End of quotation. By this analysis, Amiri thinks that one can and should abandon the thesis of the banality of evil if one wants to arrive at insight into the evil that is more than just banal. You see the paradox, insight into evil, but we thought that the evil is the end of the chain. So the desire to go beyond claiming that it's the end of the chain persists the desire to penetrate what the mind says is penetrable. I mean, this sounds like the first sentence in a critique of pure reason, that in the nature of a human reason to ask question, it knows that it can never answer. It's worth noticing that the talk of discourse about evil in this manner is familiar to us from other domains. Those who are acquainted with the Kantian philosophy, even Kantian theoretical philosophy, will immediately experience the homology between this image of evil and the idea of the thing in itself, the noumenal. The thing in itself suggests a limit, a boundary that reason is unable to cross. It is here as a black box and sits outside the phenomenal world. But that's a weak homology, even though I think it is clearly valid. The stronger homology is that of freedom itself. Freedom, which is the basis of the whole Kantian practical moral philosophy, assumes this radical separation from the phenomenal world. Freedom is radically separated from nature, and the laws of morality occupy a different sphere from the laws of natural necessity. In this sense, Kant is not ready to submit to an intellectual manipulation if he were to be asked to give basis or reason for freedom, or to give it reasons or foundation. Kant refuses to give reasons for being moral or for being free. To conceive of reasons for moral action is to fall back to the mode of thinking of nature in causal terms, which is valid in the natural sciences, but not in the discussion of moral law and human freedom. There must be a human value that stands at the end of this chain of values and does not rely on any other external, factual, natural reason. A value that is the source of all values. This value is for Kant freedom. Behind freedom, there is just nothing. Freedom stands at the end of the chain, and Kant is unable or unwilling to base freedom on any theoretical ground. It's the destiny of freedom to support itself. The same goes for the goodwill. The goodwill is good in and for itself, not for what it achieves or for what the matter or the consequences of its action. It is this self-referentiality that makes morality neither an extension of old habits and customs of society, a matter of the past, nor a means for achieving future ends. So actually, Kantian morality frees us not only from the past, it frees us also from future. So it's against, in a way, Marxism and Edmund Burke, if you want. In this sense, freedom remains an enigma in the Kantian scheme. I'll argue it remains an enigma as evil remains an enigma. Transcendental freedom can initiate a series of events in the external world without any antecedent reasons or cause. Is there a homology between the image of goodwill and that of the image of evil? And do both lie outside the phenomenal world and suggest an enigma for human mind? Before we try to answer this line of argument, which I will not, let's add one other mode of discourse, one related to aesthetic judgment. Again, at least within the Kantian tradition, aesthetic is not subject to interrogation from efficiency, for example. We're not supposed to ask what is the practical value of a painting or sculpture or a movie or a piece of... The painting has aesthetic value that is not parasitic on its efficiency. Its purposiveness, as you know, without purpose, it is self-referential and does not point to any aim beyond aesthetic. Here again, aesthetic stands at the end of the chain without leaning on the outside or external factor. The same way goes to the genius, for example, as a fountain of creative and original idea that start just completely something new out of nothingness. I hope that the homology between the ways we talk about freedom, morality, and aesthetics, not to say about God himself, bears some resemblance to the way we talk about evil. But as we know, this tradition of German idealism following Kant was subsequently critiqued both for its talk about morality and freedom and for its take on aesthetics. Marx, Adorno, Benjamin, Bourdieu are just few names to mention in their critique of the Kantian tradition and its understanding of both freedom and aesthetic. Much of their work aimed to put freedom and aesthetic back within history, not outside it, within society and not transcending it. In this sense, these thinkers were aiming at expanding the territory of our human investigation. I mean, I know this is a gross generalization, and leave less enigma in these spheres. Freedom is not just an inner state of mind, and this requires material conditions, and morality requires certain well-being in order to flourish. Here I suggest to pose two related questions. I'm not going to answer them. The first question is related to the homology itself, if it does hold. The second question relates to the critique. Does the critique of Kantian morality and Kantian aesthetics hold modus mutandis to our way we think and deal with evil? Do we stop too short from our effort to analyze it or decipher it? Do we give up too early? The danger is clear, and the resistance to the attempt to analyze evil is real and imminent. There is always the risk of moving from understanding to explaining, and from explaining to justifying, and this would mean the loss of the possibility of orientation between good and bad. One way to understand Arendt's argument is to move the focus from the one to the many, from the individual to the machine, to the social machine, and from intentionality to consequences. Here I want to pause for a short detour before I get back and analyze/criticize with Professor Biderman together Arendt's take on evil. The move away from intentions to structure is not new in social thought. Marx's analysis of capitalism as a mode of production is just one, but he's not the only one. No wonder that Marxism has ambiguous relation to moralism, if not to say morality as a whole. The capitalist is first of all a person holds a social economic position in society before she or he is a man with bad intentions or evil mind. Does that mean that Marx leaves morality completely outside his system? Not sure, but what is clear that he leaves moralism out of his system. But Marx was not the only one to think in terms of social structures. In recent literature, and here I want to move a little bit to Palestine, Israel. In recent literature, one can find a similar structural move in the study of colonialism. Patrick Wolf, a prominent scholar of settler colonialism, who just passed away, argued that settler colonialism is not an event, rather, it is a structure. It is repetitive, monotonous to the point of routine. This routine portrays it as an almost normal. The event loses its eventness because it becomes part of the background scene. It becomes the rule, not the exception. And as such, it's not noticeable, but goes in many ways under the radar. If everybody is doing the same, how can we tell that this is the wrong thing to do? But many are worried that this kind of approach can also leave the bad guys, the evil ones, off the hook. It puts too much onus on structure, social forces, routine. Where is the agency? Where did the bad guys vanish? Where is the personal responsibility? There is a certain ambivalence with scholars regarding Patrick Wolf's attitude, for example, toward colonialism as a structure. If it is just structure, then are there no criminals? In the Palestinian case, there are some prominent historians like Noor Masalha, who spent years of his life trying to show how the Zionist thinkers entertained the idea of transfer openly in their writings. He brings one quote after the other to show the inner state of mind of the Zionist leaders. The aim is clear: to show the intention the way one can show them in criminal case to prove what criminal lawyer would say, mens rea. You know what's mens rea? It's an inner state of mind of the criminal. The aim was to show that the expulsion in 1948 was a premeditated action. It's not just a structure. This desire to demonstrate the intention is understandable, but it comes with a heavy price. At the same time that it can work to incriminate, it can work to exonerate. If intentions are required to assume responsibility, then what happens when the agent does not have intentions, or at least does not think that he has them? We're not fully sure what our intentions are all the time. The obsession with intention can be dangerous. One doctrine that has been developed in war is the double effect theory. Double effect theory. This theory makes a distinction between the intended actions and those that are clearly foreseen and expected, but not necessarily intended at the first place. Much of the action movies that we watch on TV are like that. A father who wants to save his kidnapped daughter kills tens of people along the rescue attempt. He didn't intend to kill them, he just intended to get his daughter back. For the father, the killing of those tens of people is only a side effect, not planned nor intended. As such, those acts of killing couldn't really be attributed to him, for his intentions are clear. This discourse of clear intention can easily become a license to kill. Not only that, but the intention to creates a barrier between the agent and the consequences of his actions, sometimes, as if he wasn't the author of those actions. In fact, this is in a way, what Kant claims in one of his writings, in the Metaphysics of Morals, he says that just action couldn't be attributed to the author. Unlike actions that are above what is required by justice, like virtuous actions that are attributed to the author, or below what justice requires, like vice actions. I will save you the details of the quotation from Kant to prove. I think that there is something very dangerous in this mode of thinking. It allows the self to build a wall between what it does and the consequences of its action. And as such, one continues with his life normally, for he hasn't been touched by the action. It didn't leave any traces on him, and he's left intact and clean. The Zionists, for example, did not intend to expel Palestinians in 1948, one can easily argue, but it just happened in the heat of the war. Israel didn't plan nor intend to occupy the rest of Palestine in 1967 war, but things developed in a way that it did. Israel didn't intend to kill thousands of Palestinians in Gaza, but only to fight Hamas militant, but it did kill thousands of civilians at the end. The Americans in Iraq just wanted to end Saddam's regime, but along the way they killed more than 1 million, directly or indirectly. President Assad in Syria just wanted to keep the integrity of his country and kill hundreds of thousands and created millions of refugees. So there is danger in the obsession of intention talk. Weber was very aware of this way of understanding ethics. He gave it a name. This is the ethics of conviction that obsessed with intention. In ethics of conviction, what matters is your internal conviction of the justness of your action, and let heavens fall. Instead of ethics of convention, Weber, in his essay on politics as vocation, suggests another kind of ethics, ethics of responsibility. In ethics of responsibility, one cannot absolve oneself from the consequences of his action under the guise of doing what he thinks that justice requires and let heavens fall. Let's make it clear. Weber ethics is not utilitarian ethics, though it does carry such an element in it. For Weber, the decision is ours even if we act out of sense of justice. Our decision is ours and we can't hang it on justice, rules, preambles, introduction, analysis, and the shape of the universe following our decision is in part due to our action. Ethics of responsibility is more forward-looking, more political, and more tuned and able to listen to the voices coming from outside the self. Now I want to go back to Arendt. I think I have 4 minutes, 5 minutes.
Yeah, okay.
How much? כמה? 5, 6? לא, אני מסיים with the death of God. Okay. 10 אני מסיים. I want to go back to Arendt. It would be interesting to build the connection between Weber ethics of responsibility and Arendt's thesis on the banality of evil on the one hand. And it's very interesting, and I think this book could have done this, but it did not. I mean, it did it indirectly to juxtapose Kant's take on evil vis-a-vis Freud's take on evil. So Freud actually putting back the phenomenal into the evil discourse in a way that, but that, of course, I'm not going to do. Here I want to argue in a way together with Professor Biderman in this book that in a way, despite the many insights in Arendt's book and in Arendt's thesis, it falls back in some way on a Kantian premises, as it seems as if all the problem with Eichmann is that he didn't think hardly enough and he could have oriented himself morally had he thought more autonomously. Now, while this probably works for the Nazi Germany, I'm not sure how far thesis can be universalized. I'm now paying my due to the title of this talk on the possibility of self-orientation, moral self-orientation. I mean that the thesis that holds that we can orient ourselves morally if we deeply use or deploy our reason hard enough in good faith. There are two lines of argument that question this thesis. One argument stems from underdeterminacy of the Kantian categorical imperative, and the text by Boaz Shalgi with its references to Schiller is compelling. I mean, it starts from Hegel, who says, I can universalize any formula. But I will not take this line. Here I want to sound a little bit conservative, emphasizing the power of habit, tradition, custom, conventions in orienting oneself. In this regard, I think Kant has overestimated the power of reason and its ability to guide our moral action. Kant thought that we can do right actions and wrong action. He paid much effort to show how our right actions could be made out of right moral reasons, out of wrong reasons. So we can do right action from the right reason, it has moral worth. We could do right action for the wrong reason, then it doesn't have moral worth. But when it comes to wrong action morally, Kant didn't contemplate the idea of wrong action that can spring from the right reasons. For he thought that we can always know what is the right action. Kant doesn't contemplate the situation where one wants to do the right action morally, but is mistaken as to what he ought to do, and as such chooses the wrong action. For Kant, we can always know what morality requires, and here I want to argue that this is not clear-cut case, and I think here lies lots of what could be discussed, not under the grand evil, but probably small evils. Kant associates wrong action morally with acting on maxim of self-love, giving oneself an exemption from the moral law and from our duties to others, privileging our own interest, self-interest. Yolanda Campbell in this volume quotes from Alain Badiou about evil fits this model, and I quote, there is evil each time egoism leads to the renunciation of a truth. One can then define evil in one phrase. Evil is the interpretation of truth by the pressure of a particular or individual interest. This is following a Kantian line. In this regard, I think Kant underestimates cases of conflict of duties. I think one of the problems of talking about evil in the sense of Auschwitz is because it's so clear that this case is a case of evil that many other cases that don't fall under this heading sort of might go under the radar. In this regard, Kant underestimates cases of conflict of duties, not conflict between myself and the others, but conflict between clashing duties to others. My duty to help my sick mother and my duty to help my friend in dire need for money or for time. In both cases, the agent is not obsessed with his own self-love or his own self-interest. Rather, he wants to do good for others in both cases. These cases are in conflict, and this conflict is crucial for my purposes and shows some of the weakness of the Kantian scheme that actually allows many things going under the radar. And here I get to nationalism. And probably I would stop here, though I didn't probably underestimate the length of my talk. I will elaborate. Let's think of categories like nationalism or patriotism. Where do they fit in the Kantian scheme? Those who fight for the nation, for its existence, sometimes for its glory or victory, prosperity, do that in part for personal self-love, but in part clearly for altruistic reasons. They are ready to pay for their lives to safeguard the well-being of others. I mean, think of soldiers fighting, they're ready to die for others. The tension here is between two kinds of duties to others, and what is considered others is in itself in question. One is to my fellow citizen, and one to humanity at large, or at least the other who are not my fellow citizens. On the personal level, in neither case, I'm not prioritizing my immediate self-love. I'm not. At this juncture, I think that the Kantian system is not of much help as to how to steer the balance. Most people orient themselves according to the way others orient themselves by mimes, by convention, and the ability to leave that famous cave and see the light of sun is questionable. יכול להיות שאני מתפרץ לדלת שלך עכשיו, לפי הכותרת שלה. The possibility of revelation doesn't exist for us, and unfortunately we are left with interpretation and more interpretation of what morality requires from us. Professor Senderovich in this volume argued for a homology between the personal and the national level. I mean, between the relation of self to other, to the relation between my nation and other nations. He wrote, although Kant's concept of radical evil seems to refer to personal moral consciousness, it could be also assigned to political or social states of affair if it's possible to ascribe self-love to states and nations. I'm not sure that this is the same, that this analogy holds. I think we are faced with a triadic system, not with a dual system of a homology. Relation of A to B is homologous to relation of C to D. I'm not sure that this holds. We are faced with a triadic system. Me, my nation, and other nation. Using the Kantian formula requires interpretation all the way down. Is that depressing? Not necessarily. The fact that what morality requires is not always clear means that we have always to struggle to show what morality does require indeed, and not to assume that morality is something clear like the light of the sun. In this regard, I'm not sure how far the example of Antigone can be productive. David Kitron in this volume have embraced Antigone. Quote, Antigone, as prototypical example of moral consciousness, integrity, and courage, opted for disobedience to avert evil laws such are eminently ungodly and anti-humanistic. Instead, she couldn't but abide only and completely by the unwritten, unalterable laws of God and heaven. End of quote. I do not want to ask, what do these unwritten, unalterable laws of God require us to do? Because everybody has his own unalterable, unwritten, universal laws. But rather I want to think what the mere idea of the existence of such laws can permit us to do. And here probably I won't go to the end of this. I will go to the last paragraph. The risk of talking about evil is that evil, as an extreme case, a clear case, can overshadow the many other cases that seem less clear and more open for interpretation. As if evil is something beyond interpretation. It's questionable whether evil itself lies beyond interpretation, or whether this is the end result of an interpretive effort on the part of us humans. The 19th century has witnessed two related philosophical events. The birth of God in Feuerbach, we created God in our own image, and the death of God with Dostoevsky. In many ways, those were one event, for if God was born, to think the possibility of the birth of God, that means that he is not God anymore, so he's actually dead as a concept. Still, we're not able to declare or contemplate the death of evil, and he's still alive and kicking. Maybe this might be a sign that God didn't die after all. Thank you. I'm sorry for...
אני מתנצל על